Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is co-host Daniel McAdams. Daniel, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Good. I want to bring up the subject today of the Balkans. You know, in the early part of the year, I wrote a statement, a rather long statement about my assessment of what was going on in the world and also domestically. But I brought up the subject of the Balkans, not because I had tremendous insight. It was just sort of an instinct that I had that it's been quiet there, relatively speaking. It's not in the news, and yet it's artificial because, you know, I guess under Clinton, we did a lot of bombing and insisting, and all of a sudden we have this area that is probably more unstable than a lot of people realize. But now they're in the news a little bit more now. And one headline said the empire was temporarily defeated in Macedonia because of some recent events. And you know, a lot of people in this country know about the places we're involved in. We're involved in so many, and there's been so many of these colored revolutions, and we're involved in Ukraine and Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan, but not so much here. So I think it's good to refresh their memory, you know, exactly where Macedonia is. And what do you think's going on there? Do you think the government is winning, or are the people winning at this very moment?
Well, in Macedonia, and you can see on the map, it's strategically very important. A lot of it is pipeline politics. There was the South Stream pipeline was scheduled to go from Russia through Bulgaria and up through Romania and into Hungary, and from there into Western Europe. Western Europe is dependent on Russian gas. Under U.S. pressure, Bulgaria backed out of the South Stream pipeline, and Russian President Putin was in Turkey recently, where he signed a deal to construct what they call the Turk-Stream or Turkish Stream pipeline, and that would be a similar route just a little further south. It would avoid Bulgaria, go up through Greece, and then a northern spur up through Macedonia, and that's critical, Serbia, Hungary, then into Austria. So,
which might make sense if we were dealing with a pure free market, and also we didn't have too much politics involved. I guess they're a little bit concerned about the pipeline going through Ukraine right now. It's a precarious situation, and we've sort of messed that up. But now we're getting very much involved here, and that's sort of the part that I get interested in. How do these things come about? Are they just all spontaneous? And I also follow an idea that most of the time governments can't be taken over unless they get support from the people, or they're tricked into support from the people, you know, through propaganda. And right now we're in the middle, but we're involved, and there are these special NGOs in there. And it shouldn't surprise too many of us. It certainly didn't surprise us that our friend Џорџ Soroš is involved in this as well.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You know, the U.S. Started turning against the Macedonian government, which was elected just last year in elections that were recognized as legitimate elections. The U.S. started running afoul of him, of the Prime Minister Gruevski, after one of the main things was he refused to go along with the sanctions on Russia. And you know, the main U.S. policy followed by the EU as well is you've got to go for sanctions on Russia, you've got to isolate Russia. Right. So that kind of painted a target on his back, and then agreeing to participate in the Turk-Stream was like the final nail in the coffin. But you have, and actually if you look, we do have a graphic of the NGO. This is one of the main NGOs that are working in Macedonia, and they're trying to stir up people to overthrow the government like we saw in Ukraine. And it's called Civil, and this is it's a you know, the major NGO. But if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see who funds this. Very openly funded by the Embassy of the United States of America and Ĝorџ Soros's Open Society, along with the German and Swiss governments. You
know, the one thing I like to do, you know, when they talk about defense money, I don't call it defense, I call it military, because words have meaning. When I say Embassy of the United States, that's just probably token, just discussion or something. But it should be up there. The taxpayers of America are behind this, so the money gets involved. And we do know that a lot of our money, because in Ukraine, you know, whether it's direct or indirect, and our CIA agents and special forces and NATO being involved in IMF money. So this is always a thing that American taxpayers get stuck. And this is one more time, it's sneaking up on us. And even though right now it looks pretty calm, and let's hope it stays that way, I can't quite put that in the category of the danger of an explosion, you know, in Yemen and the ongoing process in Syria as well as Ukraine. But that part of the world could all of a sudden burst forth and be a very violent area again.
Absolutely. And, you know, the other thing is that just this week, the U.S. and EU leaders went to Macedonia to negotiate with the government, essentially to negotiate its capitulation. Even though they were freely elected, we say we support democracy, they were freely elected, and here comes EU and U.S. diplomats coming in saying, hey, you got to hold early elections next year, and you got to have a transitional government in the meantime. Essentially, it's an overthrow without blood in the streets.
Yeah, it's another coup, but it's not coups. We think of the violence, they throw them out or put pressure on people where they have to leave. And this is a case that looks cleaner and neater, but if no outside forces were involved, there probably wouldn't be an election right now, wouldn't you think?
No, not at all. But the other thing, there was the threat of violence. Just recently, there was a group of Albanian terrorists who attacked, and I think they killed about 20 police officers in a small village. And so I think that threat of violence and the threat that you could have another Ukraine situation, perhaps it helped convince the prime minister to back down. But can you imagine if the Chinese came over and told Obama, you've got to cut your time as president 2 years short because you did some bad things like spying on the Americans?
You know, when the Soviet system collapsed, 89 and 90, that area, and we started opening up our doors and trading, and we were doing rather well till about 2 years ago or so, all of a sudden it was like a switch. No longer are we going to do anything with the Russians. They're bad people, they're evil people, and they do everything wrong, and they cause all the problems, whether it's in Syria or whether it's in Ukraine. And this is a consequence of that attitude. You know, if we had perfect peace through Ukraine in negotiation, if the people of Ukraine had been allowed to work this out, there might be two parts of Ukraine or something, but this is a continuation. One place they fail, you know, and it causes them to have to say, oh, well, maybe we can go south and maybe we can get around what the imperialists are doing and take care of this. But it is a consequence of this switch turning on. It always amazes me on why are they doing this? They turn the switch on and they get the Europeans to go along. I don't see how it's going to help the Europeans. This fight here is not necessarily going to help the Europeans. They may come up short in both pipelines.
They need the gas. That's the thing. They're shooting themselves in the head because they're not going to have any. What do they think they're going to get shale oil from the U.S.? You know, they need this energy, yet somehow they keep following the U.S. dictate to shut off these pipelines.
Right. Anyway, I wanted to bring this attention to our viewers. I think it's a very important issue, and keep an eye on that. We're going to keep an eye on this, and I think that it is potentially a very dangerous area, but let's hope something good comes of it. That's always a possibility, but people will not do the right thing if they don't have the right information, and American people should stand up and say, no more financing of more revolutions. We don't need more war on the table. Anyway, I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in to the Liberty Report, and come back soon.